Transmigrated as a disabled protagonist, how should I continue the script? Chapter 11, Slaying the Evil Entity. This is an ancient swordsmithing technique, with not a hint of modern technology. Its sharpness isn't particularly great. Why don't you sell it to me? I'm willing to offer a high price to keep it in my collection. In Yokohama, any shop daring to openly deal with weapon crafting, whether cold weapons or otherwise, often has some connection to the underworld. The shopkeeper seemed to offer friendly advice, but in reality, he was avoiding certain questions, such as whether this ancient craftsmanship was rare or what kind of materials were used. Without any particular context, after listening to a piece of nonsense from him, Dazai-Osamu rummaged through his pocket, wallet, paperclip, phone, the complete suicide, yet couldn't find a single tool to threaten someone with. So, he pulled out Yakimaru's left arm, and with a clang, the white light of a blade appeared. He placed the sword embedded in Yakimaru's left forearm against the other party's neck. This sincerity should be enough, right? The owner was startled in fear. Wait, I'm willing to exchange 10 swords for that sword. I don't want to hear you rambling. Hand over the sword. Nakahara Chuya had you repair, Dazai-Osamu, always quick to learn whatever he comes into contact with, and he had learned violence from the port mafia. Recently, amidst the various underground assassinations, he mischievously said, "Take a look at this sword of mine. If I lightly scratch it against your neck, don't you think it might become sharper?" The owner painfully admitted, "Yes, it's extremely sharp, I was wrong." Dazai-Osamu said, "Hurry up, if you're any slower, I might have to pass the bill to your grandson." "I don't have a grandson," the owner exclaimed in surprise. Dazai-Osamu cheerfully explained, "If no grandson, then a granddaughter, just to make handling your funeral more convenient afterward." The owner. He endured, if it weren't for the fact that the young man had such a murderous aura. Throughout the entire process, the tool like Yakimaru maintained an unchanging posture. Toward the white life flame, he wouldn't raise his hand to kill, but when it came to colors outside of white, well, that would depend on the situation. It was quite clear that the greedy owner of this shop didn't belong to the safe category. Dazai-Osamu used Mori Ogai's money to settle the bill, not a penny more, not a penny less. He hung the newly repaired sword at Yakimaru's waist, nodded his head, and with a bit of a sense of accomplishment from playing the bargain game, said, "There's a feeling of a swordsman fallen in hard times. Next time, how about we visit a kendo dojo and kick down their door?" Yakimaru intently focused on her, the life flame actively moving forward. His artificial left hand slightly curled its finger joints, wanting to take the other person's hand, rather than having his hand held by the other. Dazai-Osamu suddenly dodged and lowered his hand, saying, "How disgusting, 2 men holding hands. No way." Yakimaru felt the failure of the hand's hold, and a sense of emptiness arose in his heart. "I don't have any experience with love." In the afternoon, not knowing what to do, Dazai-Osamu took Yakimaru wandering around. Whenever there was danger, Yakimaru would pull him away, making it so that the two never met any sense of danger during their stroll. At a gathering place for stray cats, clusters of small life flames gathered on the dark ground. After buying some bread and smoked ham at a snack stall, Dazai-Osamu taught Yakimaru how to feed the cats. The two people, who knew nothing about love, unexpectedly showed a bit of tenderness. In the end, when people are bored, they'll do anything. Compared to dogs, I prefer cats. Dazai-Osamu opened Yakimaru's palm, placed a small piece of bread in it, attracting the cats to come and lick the food. Cats won't cling to you. When it's time to part, they'll do so easily. Even small animals know that no one will stay by your side forever. Humans, on the other hand, are more like dogs, give them a little benefit, and they come running, sniffing around. After they're full, they still hang around, waiting for a second free meal. He tilted his head, glancing at Yakimaru, who was fully focused on feeding the cats. His black hair always covered half his face when he lowered his head, revealing only part of his delicate features. Perhaps hardship grants a unique quality. Yakimaru could never become a typical junior high school student, sitting in a classroom with his head buried in books. Dazai-Osamu placed half of a sausage directly on top of Yakimaru's head. As expected, a particularly bold and plump cat stood up, using its 2 paws to grab the sausage. Yakimaru's expression remained unchanged, his face blocked by the cat's body, making it impossible for him to see the other flames. At the same time, he couldn't see Dororo. As Yakimaru slightly moved his head, the sausage fell to the ground, rolled once, and was quickly snatched up by the cats to be shared. The plump cat that had stood up fluffed up its fur and let out a cry before running over to grab the last scraps. "Is Yakimaru looking for me?" Dazai-Osamu said after his playful act. He peeled the next sausage, shifted Yakimaru's mask upward a little, and fed it to this unusual, stray cat. "What do I look like in Yakimaru's eyes? Is there enough food for Dororo?" Yakimaru made a biting motion, swallowed, but couldn't taste the flavor of the sausage. As repayment for the food. This Yakimaru, who had never been treated kindly by anyone other than his adoptive father, squatted on the ground, closed his frightening mask, without any possessions or wealth. He then offered the sword at his waist in front of Dazai-Osamu. "You're giving it to me?" Dazai-Osamu curled his finger and flicked Yakimaru's mask-covered face, reasonably saying, "I paid the money, you give it to me, and then I have to put it back on your right hand? Wouldn't that be a lot of trouble for me?" The cherished sword in Yakimaru's hand wasn't taken, and he quietly faced Dazai-Osamu. "This is all I have." Someone with only 100 yen in their pocket, giving away their entire 100 yen, is entirely different from someone with a bank card and giving away their remaining cash. The sword was the only gift Yakimaru could offer. Dazai-Osamu's eyes reflected the image of the sword, and he realized how precious it was to Yakimaru. In a barely audible voice, he said, "I don't need your gratitude, nor do I think that I helped you. Even without me, Nakahara Chuya would still have returned your left leg to you." In fact, Dazai-Osamu thought that Yakimaru staying in Suribachi Street and being taken in by the sheep would have been better. There would be no need to get involved in the storm of leadership changes within the port mafia. Yakimaru's stubbornness was silent but resolute. However, Dazai-Osamu was equally unyielding, directly picking up a confused stray cat in his hands, blocking Yakimaru's gaze that seemed to pierce through to his soul. The great concealment technique, "You can't see me." Realizing that Dororo was once again blocked, Yakimaru dejectedly gave up, tail down. He wanted to always see Dororo's life flame, not the life flames of small animals. Dazai-Osamu triumphantly stroked the stray cat in his hand, the price being 2 scratches from the cat's claws. Ow! That was the end of it. Dazai-Osamu ate the remaining bits of sausage and bread. Who said he could only eat dog food? When a person gets ruthless, they won't even let cat food go to waste. On the way back, Dazai-Osamu and Yakimaru once again walked along the river, with Dazai-Osamu's usual fascination for gazing at rivers, saying something that could scare an ordinary person. "Yokohama has been shaking a lot recently, many people have died. It's almost like if you look closely, you could see floating corpses." He stuck out his tongue slightly. "Ugh, getting shot and then drowning afterward, that kind of death is too painful. It would be better to just shoot yourself in the temple." He suddenly looked at the afternoon sky, which had darkened a bit, and muttered to himself. Not sure if it's the issue with ability users, but it seems like the Tsurumi River has gained an urban legend. Supposedly, a monster grabs the legs of people passing by the riverbank and pulls them into the water. The dead are often missing internal organs. As soon as he finished speaking, the walking pace of Yakimaru beside Dazai-Osamu slowed down. But he still kept walking, following Dazai-Osamu. At the same time, drag marks appeared in the wet mud along the riverbank, and something stirred in the water. Dazai-Osamu, with a dreamy tone, said, "Do you think it could be a mermaid? Or perhaps a river-dwelling spirit? An evil creature?" Yakimaru's focus shifted from Dororo in front of him to something below. Wet handprints appeared on his legs. Yakimaru, with the power of the demon god radiating from his soul, stood like a bright light in the darkness. The dark red flames of malice on his body flickered weakly, his entire being exuding the tempting scent of food. It was as if the entities were constantly whispering, "Consume this one, devour the immense power hidden within him, and they would become extraordinarily powerful." In this world where demons in hiding and lacking spiritual energy, modern times have drawn malevolent creatures from afar, attracted by death and killing. The newly arrived Kappa in the Tsurumi River, with its blood-red eyes, watched the two walking along the riverbank. The one walking faster was recklessly discussing it, while the one walking slower was practically a delicacy of the human world. If only it could devour the two of them. Devour. The Kappa hid in the murky waters of the Tsurumi River, gathering strength, trying to drag the black-haired young man into the water. However, not only did Yakimaru not fall into the river, but instead, he pulled the Kappa out. It lunged onto the bank. With its frog-like limbs, the Kappa clung to Yakimaru's legs. It has appeared. A cold ripple of joy named the Hunt stirred within Yakimaru's calm heart. In that very moment, Dazai Osamu turned around, suddenly stepping back 2 paces. The flash of a sword brushed past the corner of his eye, sharp and blinding. Yakimaru drew his sword, his long hair sweeping in an arc, creating a perfect black curve. The killing intent erupted like a spring from icy depths, as he slashed in one swift motion toward the Kappa's legs and the river's surface. The sword aura, something never before seen, seemed to exist in the very air, ferocious and violent, tearing through the invisible enemy. This was no Onmi Yoji technique. Nor was it the ability of some exorcist or spiritual user. The slayer was none other than a young human boy, one who could not see with his eyes, hear with his ears, or speak with his mouth. Dazai Osamu felt as though he was witnessing something that shattered the conventional world, too mesmerized to even blink. Impossible. The Kappa's scream echoed like ripples exploding across the water, and Dazai Osamu covered his ears to block the piercing sound. Amid the splashing water, Yakimaru sheathed his sword, his face wet with droplets, while the blade dripped with a strange liquid, clearer than the river water. Slowly, it dripped down. This was the blood of the Kappa slain by Yaki during the night. It died, full of terror. This power, it's not spiritual energy, yet it's more sinister than even the most malicious of monsters. So weak. Yakimaru, having slain his first malevolent creature in 2 months, thought in mild dissatisfaction. In his eyes, there had been no exceptional battle, he merely split the red life flame in 2, and it quickly dissipated into a faint smoke. Dazai Osamu approached, touching the clear liquid with his fingertips, but the liquid evaporated even faster. In an instant, the Kappa's mangled corpse vanished without a trace. What was that? Dazai Osamu sniffed his fingers, catching the lingering stench of the river water, instantly disgusted. Ugh, that's gross. No way the Tsurumi River could harbor a mermaid. Yakimaru couldn't detect the stench, and as if completing an ordinary task, he wiped the blood of the malevolent creature off his sword, sheathed it, and the icy killing intent he directed at the creature vanished as well. The puppet stood quiet and obedient, so docile that there was no trace of the greatness of having just slain a monster with a mortal body. Dazai Osamu dried his fingers, gazing at him with deep meaning. I've realized something. You've killed many, nameless things. Yakimaru, who was always searching for something outside, wasn't seeking out criminals or evildoers, but rather the things that ordinary people couldn't see. These things would often initiate attacks on Yakimaru. Yakimaru never hid his purpose, searching for malevolent creatures and the demon god, to slay them. Over the past 14 years, he sharpened his combat abilities, turning the knowledge in books into survival skills. While he might not be stronger than his original self, he had certainly become at least 3 times more ruthless in his strikes. As he was about to take a few steps forward, he suddenly stopped, bumping into his own leg, feeling that after being tugged, his artificial limb had slightly detached from his body. Not good, I can't walk properly. Yakimaru felt a bit helpless. Without his adoptive father, there was no one to help him adjust his artificial limbs. It fell off. Dazai Osamu was stunned for a moment, then bent down to help properly reattach the prosthetic limb. Suddenly, he became aware of a serious issue. The face was one thing, but Yakamaru's body was still in its growth phase. His artificial limbs couldn't keep up with his development, which could cause the stitched parts of his body to lose functionality. The artificial spine might eventually prevent him from ever standing up again. No wonder Mori-san hadn't explained the next steps for their cooperation. He was waiting for this realization to dawn on him. He needs money, connections, and influence. Only then can he save Yakamaru. Chapter 11 End. Chapter 12, Encountering on the Road. Dazai Osamu did not bring Yakamaru back to the Port Mafia headquarters, but instead went straight to the clinic from the beginning. Mori Ogai, wearing a white coat, sat behind his desk, swiftly writing down one plan after another. Hearing the sound of the two returning, Mori Ogai turned his chair, interlocked his fingers, resting them on his knees, and spoke with a knowing tone, "Dazai-kun, it's been a while since you've come here to see me." Dazai Osamu, in a foul mood, dragged Yakamaru inside and closed the door behind them. "You still haven't given me the information about those with healing abilities." "Oh, so that's what this is about." Mori Ogai tapped his fingers on his thigh, his slightly raised hair and bangs giving him a less serious appearance. Under Dazai Osamu's indifferent gaze, he casually said, "Her name is Yosano Akiko, ability, Thou Shalt Not Die. She can save anyone from near-death injuries in one go. In terms of healing abilities, Miss Yosano is the rightful angel of death." Dazai Osamu continued asking, "Where is she?" Mori Ogai pulled open a drawer and handed him a prepared list. "Take care of these people for me, and I'll tell you where that ability user is." Dazai Osamu. Yakamaru's sixth sense warned him, the person in front of him had no good intentions. The blonde girl once again stood in front of Mori Ogai. As Yakamaru half drew his sword, Dazai Osamu stopped him and pressed the blade back. Dazai Osamu said to Mori Ogai, "This condition was agreed upon earlier. I have no obligation to do any extra tasks for you, newly appointed boss of the Port Mafia." Mori Ogai smiled lightly and said, "Dazai-kun, do you know what the optimal solution is?" Under the premise of not sacrificing anything, both the overall goal and sub-goals can be ideally achieved, Dazai Osamu smoothly replied. In reality, such a solution rarely exists. Mori Ogai revealed his intention, "I want to invite you to join the Port Mafia." Dazai Osamu glanced at the oblivious Yakamaru and shrugged, "I'm not interested for the time being." Mori Ogai nodded, "Indeed, for the time being." His eyes, from a certain angle, were red rather than purple, and with a soulless, demonic gaze, he stared at Dazai Osamu. "Sooner or later, you'll be interested." Yakamaru suddenly grabbed Dazai Osamu's hand, pulling him behind. The tip of the sword struck the ground, drawing a single character. "Leave." Mori Ogai's pupils tightened as he stared at Yakamaru, postponing Dazai Osamu's issue for later. "Yaki-kun, it seems my analysis of you was completely wrong. You understand words, what an exceptional natural talent for learning." He couldn't help but applaud, saying to both Dazai Osamu and Yakamaru, "To be honest, I'm truly impressed." The fragments of diamonds refracted light even more intensely than before, and the complete image was undeniably captivating. He tore up the list he had written, openly changing his mind, and tossed the pieces into the nearby trash. Standing up, one hand in his pocket, he exuded a rough yet mature charm. "Very well, you can go ahead and find the doctor, and I'll be responsible for providing the intelligence. But there's one thing." Mori Ogai raised his index finger to his lips, as if unable to surpass a limitation. "Before this agreement loses its effectiveness, you cannot join the Port Mafia, nor can you join any other organization. My clinic will always welcome you, and I will ensure that no other forces disturb you." How does that sound? This offer was indeed tempting, and Dazai-Osamu was intrigued. However, before making any move, he carefully observed Yakimaru. Do not trust this man. Yakimaru tightly gripped his hand, not loosening his hold. On guard. Dazai-Osamu closed his eyes in thought, and after opening them, he said, the intelligence exchange can continue, but I do not accept your other conditions. If I have any requests, I'll contact you again. Mori Ogai, disappointed, said, Dazai-kun, you're clearly interested. Dazai-Osamu smiled and replied, there's nothing I can do. Sometimes you just have to trust your instincts, and it just so happens that Yakimaru's instincts are very sharp, making me feel like you're plotting something behind the scenes. His tone lowered, and for the first time, the young man gave Mori Ogai a slightly chilling feeling. You're worried too, aren't you? Don't worry, as long as I exist, I'll prove the previous boss's final words for you. If you ever change your mind and decide to kill me, be sure to give me a quick and painless death. Lowering his head, Dazai-Osamu smiled in the shadow, speaking each word slowly and clearly. Otherwise, be careful of the ghost knocking at your door in the middle of the night. That ghost could be a demon, or it could be someone capable of slaying demons. Half an hour after Dazai-Osamu had taken 2 boxes of instant noodles, syringes, rabies vaccines, and various bandages and supplies. Mori Ogai sat dejectedly in his chair, lamenting to his ability, Elise, am I really not fit to be the boss? The port mafia is in complete chaos, only a third have submitted, we lack manpower, and we have no weapons. If this continues, I'm going to work myself to death. The blonde girl, eating her cake, gave a vague and unclear response. Diamonds are always precious, aren't they? She bit her fork, sharing a similar thought process with Mori Ogai, yet have a persona of disdain for Mori Ogai, feigned a sweet smile. Isn't it more interesting to take the diamond sensei has his eye on? These two wouldn't use it for themselves, but they certainly wouldn't let anyone else have it either. For example, the Special Division's agent and their bodyguard, Fukuzawa Yukichi. Natsume Soseki had 2 disciples, namely Fukuzawa Yukichi and Mori Ogai. Compared to Fukuzawa Yukichi, who focused on accumulating connections and building a foundation, Mori Ogai had already pulled ahead, standing firmly on the tripartite framework objective. With the port mafia's resources in his hands, he was striving to save the collapsing organization. Naturally, he was on guard against another person who might steal away valuable assets. Human resources are incredibly important. A single Dazai-kun and a single Yaki-kun could surpass the value of countless individuals. On the other side, Fukuzawa Yukichi had recently been enjoying smooth success, which was most evident in his more gentle expression, his sharpness now tempered, lacking the coldness once associated with his title as the Silver Wolf. From a moment of pity towards a remarkably intelligent young boy, he casually lent a hand, and that person clung to him, eventually becoming his partner. Over the years, he felt increasingly that his decision was the right one. Helping the weak, protecting ordinary citizens, and maintaining order, these tasks, too dangerous for the military and police, seemed perfectly suited for him. The only headache was that Ranpo couldn't go out alone and required Fukuzawa to often keep him by his side. After consecutive successful cases, the renowned detective Edogawa Ranpo, wearing his signature black glasses, no longer looked down on the thoughts of ordinary people, influenced by a sense of belonging. Fukuzawa-san once told him, "My ability to see through everything is a special ability, and it should be used for doing good." But what exactly is a good deed? At this moment, Fukuzawa Yukichi and Edogawa Ranpo had just returned to Yokohama, having completed their latest bodyguard mission. In the back seat of the taxi, Edogawa Ranpo looked completely bored, his eyes wandering everywhere like a curious child fascinated by the world. As they passed by a small park, he suddenly glanced toward a park bench where, in one corner, 2 boys were sitting with cups of instant noodles in hand. They're eating instant noodles, and it seems to smell really good. Being a lover of snacks, Edogawa Ranpo patted his hungry stomach, his mind wandering. Suddenly, His eyes suddenly focused, his attention locking onto the black-haired boy on the right, and he instinctively grabbed Fukuzawa Yukichi's arm. Fukuzawa Yukichi, dressed in a kimono and holding his sword, sat in front and turned back, puzzled. Ranpo. President, look over there. Edogawa Ranpo hurriedly said, showing a bit of the general awareness he had learned from his mentor. Just as the taxi drove past the park, Fukuzawa Yukichi barely caught a glimpse of two figures, confirming that they were two unfamiliar boys, appearing slightly younger than the 18-year-old Ranpo. Is there a problem? Fukuzawa Yukichi asked cautiously, not daring to underestimate Ranpo's intelligence. At some point, Edogawa Ranpo had removed his black glasses, and his green eyes stared blankly out the car window. His pupils slightly dilated, as if he had been startled by something unseen. That person. Who? The boy with the black ponytail. Humans are truly resilient. He spoke in a low voice, and what he said not only startled Fukuzawa Yukichi but also the driver. Fukuzawa-san, why is it that some people, without skin, without limbs, without sight, hearing, or smell, still manage to survive? Is this the survival instinct my parents once talked about? Edogawa Ranpo didn't quite understand, but after witnessing it, he gained a bit more insight into human nature. He wants to keep living. But the person next to him wants to die. One seeking survival, the other seeking death. How could such a bizarre combination exist in this world? Driver, stop the car. Fukuzawa Yukichi shouted, and the driver slammed on the brakes. Since retiring from his profession as an assassin and choosing to help others, Fukuzawa Yukichi immediately misunderstood Edogawa Ranpo's meaning. He opened the car door and, pulling the stunned Ranpo along with him, called out, "Let's hurry and go save them." The physically weak Edogawa Ranpo, being dragged along in a rushed sprint, was completely out of breath, unable to say a word. His vision filled with stars, his legs turned to jelly, and he wanted to say, "If we don't go, they will come find us on their own. No, please. Please, slow down. Ranpo-sama is going to die from this 100-meter dash." Upon reaching their destination, Edogawa Ranpo seemed to have his soul drifting out of his mouth, his expression one of complete resignation. Fukuzawa Yukichi, with a serious face, approached the two in front of them. Just as he was about to speak, the black-haired boy holding the instant noodles suddenly became alert. The boy's hand moved toward the hilt of his sword. Edogawa Ranpo quickly rushed over, spreading his arms wide to protect the startled Fukuzawa Yukichi. "Don't attack. He's a good person." Yakimaru, upon seeing Ranpo step in, forcefully halted his movements. Edogawa Ranpo's explanation wasn't directed at Yakimaru but rather at the one in charge, Dazai Osamu. However, Dazai, who was eating instant noodles, blew on the hot broth and glanced at the two who had rushed over, his thoughts not quite aligned as he casually remarked, "A good person who's killed before, huh?" Edogawa Ranpo firmly replied, "Of course. The president has saved many people, and the ones he killed were all bad guys." Dazai Osamu, too lazy to care, said, "You all continue. Justice only comes after the fight." Edogawa Ranpo, frustrated, pointed at him, his green eyes flashing with cold rationality, and sharply stated, "He has many disabilities. You want to help treat him, don't you? We have a doctor." "Oh." Only then did Dazai Osamu give the other person a serious look. Edogawa Ranpo pulled on Fukuzawa Yukichi's kimono sleeve, creating a safe distance. Catching his breath, he continued, "President, phew, give him a business card. Someone like him, if not thoroughly investigated, won't feel at ease. Let's leave, or he'll directly attack you." Fukuzawa Yukichi cautiously regarded the indifferent black-haired boy. As someone skilled with a sword himself, he could tell that the black-haired boy was a master, and he trusted Ranpo's judgment. Fukuzawa Yukichi sat across from Dazai Osamu, placing a business card in front of him without adopting an air of superiority. "If you need help, make sure to contact us. Just from Edogawa Ranpo words alone, he had made his decision. This was trust. Dazai Osamu could hear the sincerity in the elder's voice. He took the business card and glanced at it, and his previously indifferent attitude suddenly shifted. The card bore the name of someone not well known in Yokohama, yet the identity was undeniably impressive. Armed Detective Agency. President, Fukuzawa Yukichi. The Armed Detective Agency, the only organization in Yokohama authorized with a skilled business permit. Our doctor is Yosano Akiko, Edogawa Ranpo said, catching his breath as he delivered the most critical point. You've heard of her, haven't you? The widely known detective, famous among the police, spoke with pride. His piercing gaze, which seemed to see through people's hearts, locked onto Dazai Osamu. This was their first meeting, and Ranpo subtly engaged in a mental fight with Dazai Osamu, unwilling to let him look down on the Armed Detective Agency. Dr. Yosano works with us, you know. Edogawa Ranpo wiped the sweat from his forehead, childishly thinking to himself, Fukuzawa-san, don't worry. After taking the first one, we can keep trying to take the second and the third. If we can poach the people the Port Mafia doesn't recruit, the Armed Detective Agency will win. Dazai Osamu remained silent for a moment, then gave a slight nod. If there are no accidents, I will come visit. Edogawa Ranpo corrected him, it's you guys. Don't treat him like your possession. The one the president and I are primarily interested in meeting is this person next to you. Fukuzawa Yukichi said nothing, quietly agreeing with Ranpo's reasoning. Dazai Osamu instinctively felt conflicted by Edogawa Ranpo's sharpness, but it wasn't something he found too difficult to accept. Alright, farewell then. He tossed the cup of instant noodles into the trash and dragged Yakimaru away, wondering why such people were so easily drawn to him. Could it be that Yakimaru had some sort of attention-attracting ability or aura? No matter. Yakimaru was with him now, and it wasn't up to these two strangers to take him away. At that moment, Yakimaru's keen intuition kicked in once more. He instinctively tried to grasp her hand, wanting to convey his protective feelings toward her. Dazai Osamu stiffened, hesitating for a moment before agreeing, though his hand felt somewhat awkward being enveloped in another's palm. A cold hand seeking warmth from his own warmth. What kind of hand-holding was this, Yakimaru? Chapter 12 End. Chapter 13, The True Mortal World. That evening, Dazai Osamu no longer had any intention of returning to the Port Mafia. Seeing that he hadn't gone to the bandits' den, Yakimaru was no longer worried about his safety. At the same time, a strange thought popped into his mind. Could the heroine of Dororo be a descendant of bandits? That would explain why she could maintain such a pure heart during chaotic times and why the villains didn't kill her. Focusing on the wrong person, following the wrong path, Yakimaru had guessed the heroine's background in the original story. This possibility left Yakimaru feeling uneasy. It wasn't that he hated Dororo's background. One cannot choose where they are born. What he hated was the inability to determine danger. Anyone with a life flame that emitted a red glow, he would never approach. Whether the red glow was tainted or pure, as long as someone had killed before, it meant that they weren't someone easily judged. Such people posed a significant threat to Yakimaru's safety. He couldn't see the faces of those with malicious intent, and he couldn't hear the lies they spoke, but that didn't mean he wouldn't be harmed by them. In times of chaos, how many people can truly be trusted? Only you. After leaving my adoptive father, I won't let anyone harm your life flame. Yakimaru had always been quietly watching Dazai Osamu. Dazai could feel it, ever since they had exchanged names, this person hardly ever looked at anyone else. He quietly stayed by his side, without causing any annoyance. How obedient. Dazai Osamu couldn't help but smile faintly. At the hotel front desk, the receptionist was registering their information, secretly glancing at Dazai Osamu and Yakimaru. The two with bandages wrapped around them were a sight that left her deeply puzzled. Did they get into a car accident together? One had their body wrapped up tightly, but not so much their limbs, leaving a delicate face exposed. The other had their limbs and neck completely wrapped, covering even a third of their charmingly handsome face with annoying bandages. While being scrutinized, this one even deliberately sent a teasing glance her way. The receptionist wanted to cover her heart, which was racing, flustered by being flirted with by someone not even as tall as her. This sister is 28 this year. How am I not 18 anymore? We would like a room with 2 beds, on one of the lower floors of the 5-story hotel. Dazai Osamu made the request, openly, as Yakamaru held his hand while subtly flirting with the receptionist. Very well, please wait a moment. The receptionist carefully selected a suitable room for him. Yakamaru couldn't see what his future girlfriend was doing, but he could see a pale white flame about 1 meter away, flickering with excitement. Next to the flame, one that desperately wanted to move forward, was the flame of Dororo, gently flickering outward in waves. Yakamaru had encountered this type of situation a few times before, usually in someone's house, and rarely in public. He didn't observe for long before being pulled away by his adoptive father. What is this person trying to do? A man? Once again, Yakamaru misjudged the gender. He took a step back, pulling Dazai Osamu, who was leaning on the reception desk, away. Dazai Osamu didn't notice anything wrong and asked in confusion, Yakamaru? Yakamaru raised his right hand and pointed at Dororo, who was across from him, towards the flame of life and heat. He's up to something with you. This woman doesn't seem to have any problems. I can tell, Dazai Osamu said, unable to comprehend. His eyes moved between the two of them. If this woman were a bad person, Yakamaru wouldn't have allowed him to get close for so long, but if she were just a good person, Yakamaru wouldn't have pulled him back. After some thought, he decided to test his own theory. They couldn't possibly stay at a hotel that made Yakamaru uneasy. Dazai Osamu's method of testing was extremely simple. He took advantage of the moment when Yakamaru wasn't prepared and reached out to touch the receptionist's hand as she was writing, quickly checking if her palm had any distinct calluses. Beautiful lady, when I grow up, how about we have coffee together? Sure. The receptionist's heart immediately blossomed with joy. This kid had such a sweet tongue, far better than those overly greasy young men. But then, she saw Dazai Osamu suddenly pulled into a stumble, embraced from behind by another young man. Under the lights, Yakamaru, with his dull gray-brown pupils, looked directly at her. There was a kind of tangible killing intent within him. Ha 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 ha. In stark contrast, Dazai Osamu burst out laughing, clutching his stomach, the cheerful and refreshing voice of a young man echoing throughout the hotel lobby, even startling those secretly monitoring him. After his laughter subsided, Dazai Osamu paid no mind to the stares of others, and upon receiving the room key, he blew a kiss. Looks like there's no chance this time, see you around. Still in his school years and already flirting, he dragged Yakamaru away. In the elevator, Yakamaru was unusually sulking because Dororo not only refused to hold hands but also wouldn't let him hug, maintaining a distance from him like a hedgehog. Dazai Osamu scolded him, "You can't just go around hugging another man. A 14-year-old boy." When they reached the 5th floor, Dazai Osamu stepped out of the elevator, only to realize Yakamaru hadn't followed. He stood there, looking pitifully like a child scolded into a corner, with his long, thin limbs, wearing oversized clothes that couldn't hide his frail frame. Dazai Osamu could only rush back to the elevator before the doors closed and drag him out. "Catch up." Yakamaru once again grabbed his hand. Their fingers almost intertwined, but failed. Why didn't Dororo leave any space between his fingers for him? At night, in the hotel room, Dazai Osamu wasn't asleep, just dozing off. After bathing, Yakamaru knelt on the bed next to him, using a towel to dry his messy hair. This gave a subtle softness to his otherwise emotionless face, yet more than beauty, there was a much stronger sense of a puppet devoid of consciousness. The two had never shared a bed together, and if you had to give a reason, it was simply that he didn't like it, strongly rejecting the idea. Dazai Osamu refused any intimate contact with anyone. A brief moment of novelty might be acceptable, but over time, don't even think about it. Conveniently, he had observed Yakimaru's true nature, just a small misguidance, and the other would take it seriously, boldly stepping into Dazai Osamu's personal space without hesitation. Yakimaru, don't get it wrong. I'm not yours, you're my puppet, got it? Dazai Osamu had waited for quite a while, but there was no sign of the port mafia making a move, leaving him visibly annoyed and displeased. Explosions and flames make a perfect pair, yet the night didn't even give him the fireworks he had hoped for. Yakimaru paused his towel drying, slowly turning to look over, only to find Dazai Osamu jumping up, leaping off the bed, and rushing to turn on the computer to search for something. As the sound of the keyboard click-clacked, Dazai Osamu pulled up a lot of publicly available information on the armed detective agency in Yokohama, further pinpointing the agency's location. An entire agency of ability users, how interesting. That person who saw right through me and Yakimaru at a glance, is he a famous detective known to the police? Could his ability be related to his detective work? My ability is no longer human. What about Yakimaru's? Dazai Osamu, full of curiosity, wasn't the least bit tired, pondering a made-up ability for him. The Eye of the Soul. An ability that can see life forces. Teenagers always have boundless imagination and energy, but Yakimaru, having calculated today's active hours, realized that normal people need rest, and so he went to drag the night owl Dazai Osamu to bed. The air conditioning was cold enough, and Dazai Osamu bundled himself tightly under the blankets, revealing only his head. His dark hair spread out, and his face, which was so captivating to women, had shed the liveliness of the day, now calm and expressionless. Good night, Yakimaru. Yakimaru scanned the room, confirming the safety of the surroundings, before entering a state of sleep. In his heart, he softly whispered. Good night. Good night, the only small light left in the darkness of his world. After a calm night, the next morning, Dazai Osamu immediately sat up to take a call. His connection with Mori Ogai wasn't one that could easily be severed. Knowing more about the intelligence within the port mafia would benefit both him and Yakimaru, helping them survive in this city without the need to flee elsewhere. They haven't come after us yet. I see, so they intend to frame Mori-san. Dazai Osamu was referring to the recent string of assassination events. If it weren't for Yakimaru's presence, he wouldn't have been so fearless about sneaking out, he would have long been assassinated by some elite killer. Although getting shot and killed wouldn't be bad, dying before reaching the goal, where's the fun in that? Today, the plan was to visit the armed detective agency to get to the bottom of things. He turned his head to look at Yakimaru, who had just gotten out of bed. Yakimaru had changed back into that old black outfit, patched and worn. The white patterns on it were of unknown meaning. Dazai had researched many Japanese family crests but couldn't find a match. Instead, it somewhat resembled a design of an unidentified plant. I'll be careful, that's that. Dazai Osamu cut off the call before the other party could finish. To Mori Ogai, Dazai being dead had its advantages, but his continued existence also had benefits. Either way, it was a win-win situation. Dazai Osamu quickly dashed over and yanked off the blanket, leaving Yakimaru confused and fumbling around to figure out where the blanket had gone. Dazai Osamu, delighted, thought, daily teasing of Yakimaru, 1/1. Dororo, good morning. Hurry and get up. The energetic Dazai Osamu had already finished washing his face and pushed Yakimaru towards the bathroom, taking the initiative to squeeze toothpaste onto the toothbrush and hand it to Yakimaru. After that, Dazai Osamu avoided watching the toothbrushing process in the mirror and went outside. Yakimaru. Dazai Osamu assumed that Yakimaru's adoptive father, Jukai, had surely taught him these things. But did Jukai ever bother with a toothbrush? Always accustomed to using water to clean his mouth, the ancient living Yakimaru stood in front of the mirror with a toothbrush in his right hand and a cup of water in his left, looking somewhat adorably confused. He hesitated for a long time, moved aside part of his mask, and then, holding the unfamiliar object, put it in his mouth and chewed it up, followed by drinking a cup of tap water. Is this breakfast? No, it's absolutely not. No one's breakfast is toothpaste. When Dazai-Osamu rushed over to check, he discovered bite marks on the toothbrush, leaving him momentarily speechless. How have you survived this long? He looked at the chewed-up toothbrush, feeling incredibly disappointed in the supposed adult and silently cursing, Yakimaru, the person who raised you was completely irresponsible, they didn't even teach you how to brush your teeth. Yakimaru. Forget it, let's just leave it at that. In the end, Dazai-Osamu's urge to educate was defeated by that face in front of him. The reality of life. It wasn't that he lacked the willpower, it was that Yakimaru's face was just too overwhelmingly disarming, making it impossible for him to confront the situation. Chapter 13 End. Chapter 14, Heading to the Detective Agency. In the streets of Yokohama, beneath an old 4-story office building. A boy in a white shirt opened the car door, pulling out another boy of the same age who carried a cold, indifferent demeanor. The second boy exuded an odd, puppet-like presence, dressed in shabby, plain clothes, and stood half a head taller than the first. The boy in the white shirt glanced up at the 4th floor of the office building, his face revealing no clear emotions. One Edogawa Ranpo was enough to make him fully focus. The driver, after collecting the fare, saw that they were heading into the office building and, being well informed, asked, "Young gentleman, are you heading to the armed detective agency?" The boy in the white shirt turned around, suddenly showing a lively expression. "Yes, I heard that they take on all kinds of private requests that can't be handled through public channels. Do you happen to know any inside information about them?" The driver didn't notice the change in his expression and kindly said, "Their president and members are good people. They've solved many dangerous and troublesome issues. If you have something difficult to handle, you can't go wrong asking them for help. However, there are many skilled individuals inside, so they might not take on very ordinary requests. For instance, if someone were looking for a lost cat or dog, the armed detective agency wouldn't even bother with that kind of request." With the networking skills that come with being a taxi driver, the man had, in fact, given rides to some of the agency's members before. Too ordinary, huh? The boy in the white shirt lifted the corner of his mouth and looked up towards the 4th floor. There, Edogawa Ranpo leaned against the window, his detective hat nearly falling off, peering at the two through his glasses. In the next second, he flashed a smile of interest and, making a megaphone gesture with his hands, shouted, "Hurry up and come on in." That's why Dazai-Osamu wasn't too accustomed to interacting with people who were both simple and enthusiastic. And now there was another one to add to the list. Not to mention, someone with an incredible ability to see through things. Wearing a white shirt and black trousers, Dazai-Osamu gave up trying to figure out how much Ranpo had seen through him. Instead, he held Yakimaru's hand and looked in the direction of the 4th floor window. The wall blocked Yakimaru's vision, but he could see Edogawa Ranpo clear and pure life flame ahead, someone just like Dororo. A pure white flame. Is this the same person we met before? The height and size of the life flame are somewhat similar. For someone he had only met once, it wasn't easy for Yakimaru to distinguish them clearly. Even his vision wasn't omnipotent. Fortunately, the entire street was filled with gray-white flames, and the pure white ones were very rare, naturally drawing Yakimaru's attention. White represented someone who hadn't experienced true evil or whose soul hadn't fallen into corruption. Besides, he wouldn't forget someone he met just yesterday to the point of complete oblivion. Not nervous? Dazai-Osamu asked him softly, clearly noticing that as they entered the bustling area, the early morning streets, with people and cars passing by, made Yakimaru feel uneasy. He had to rely on the taxi to calm himself enough to continue. This scene gave Dazai-Osamu a deeper understanding of Yakimaru's mental state. Yakimaru was accustomed to distancing himself from crowds. Having been solitary for so long, even his formidable combat abilities couldn't make him feel safe among people. Dazai Osamu saw this boring world with remarkable clarity. It was precisely because he understood the fickleness of humanity that he had lost trust in others. After all those years, he had finally encountered someone as simple and easy to understand as Yakimaru. Let's head up. Maybe we'll meet a few more interesting people. After making this decision, Dazai Osamu led the way, guiding the solitary Yakimaru, who wandered in the darkness, up the stairs. Yakimaru no longer found the second pure white life flame interesting. He only kept his focus on Dororo. If this was a journey, then let this journey last a little longer. There's no need for it to end too quickly. The plot was important, but what supported his will to survive wasn't simply completing tasks, it was the chance to experience the brightness of life that he could eventually witness. 4th floor, inside the armed detective agency. Both official members and unofficial interns arrived for work an hour early. The reason was that President Fukuzawa had informed them the previous day that a special client seeking assistance would be coming today, and there was a good chance they might arrive ahead of time. Moreover, President Fukuzawa wanted the members to witness this particular case, explaining that even Ranpo, the agency's strategist, couldn't fully see through the client. Even Ranpo-san couldn't see through them. This point alone intrigued the members of the agency. Among them, Fukuzawa Yukichi's disciple, Kunikita Dalpo, was particularly annoyed as today's disruption interfered with his schedule. He continuously wrote new itinerary updates in his notebook. Noticing Ranpo-san's actions, Kunikita Dalpo remarked in surprise, "It's rare to see Ranpo-san this happy. It's 2 boys, and they're coming up the stairs." Clerk Haruno Kirako glanced out the window and immediately brought over 2 cups of tea, preparing to welcome the clients. Next to them, in the perpetually unoccupied chair, Tayama Katai, wrapped in a blanket, opened his bleary, sleep-deprived eyes and muttered, "Why do I have to show up too?" "It's the president's orders." Kunikita Dalpo answered silently in his heart, still filled with surprise. Katai was an internet intelligence expert who almost never left his home. If he could avoid going out, he would, and the number of times he had come to the office building could be counted on one hand. Putting his notebook into his bag, the blonde Kunikita Dalpo sat upright, waiting for the arrivals. What kind of people will they be? Knock, knock. The door was politely knocked twice, and from outside came a pleasant, smiling voice of a young man. "Excuse me, is this the armed detective agency? Come in." Edogawa Ranpo, having returned from the window, put on his detective hat and took out his glasses from his pocket. His attitude left no doubt that he was ready to take this case seriously. 2 intersecting fates from different worlds were about to undergo new changes, pointing toward a strange direction. As Dr. Yosano stepped out from the agency's infirmary, she leaned against the doorframe, one hand on her hip, exuding the aura of a powerful 17-year-old girl. She yawned with her gloved right hand and asked, "Who needs my treatment? I'm struggling to wake up this early for work." The way she said this sounded more like she was asking, "Who wants to come here and die?" The few members present in the office suddenly looked toward her, cold sweat trickling down. All at once, they pointed toward the quiet Yakimaru. Him. Unlike the time when she first joined the armed detective agency, mentally exhausted from her military service, Yosano Akiko was no longer bound by the army's control and no longer needed to treat wounded soldiers for the country. She had fully adapted to her new work environment, and her true nature was now on display, evidenced by the large cleaver prominently placed in the infirmary. She assessed the treatment subject with great interest, suddenly widening her eyes. Prosthetics? The agency's doctor had discovered an issue with Yakimaru. 20 minutes earlier, Dazai Osamu and Yakimaru were seated in the lobby. Facing Edogawa Ranpo's unblinking gaze, Dazai Osamu, without flinching, concocted a story. "Yakimaru and I come from a poor background. We don't have the financial resources to go to a big hospital. We heard your agency has a skilled doctor, so we decided to entrust you with Yakimaru's treatment. The person beside me has serious physical problems." Clerk Haruno Kirako, seated across from them and taking notes, looked over at Yakimaru after hearing this. On the surface, Yakimaru didn't appear to have any issues, though his body was wrapped in an excessive amount of bandages, suggesting the possibility of external injuries. She didn't speculate further and performed her duty by asking, "May I ask which aspect of the body the problem pertains to?" Dazai Osamu's expression turned serious as he replied, "Missing body parts." Haruno Kirako nodded and recorded the information. Seated beside her, Edogawa Ranpo couldn't sit still and leaned in close to Yakimaru's mask, ignoring Dazai Osamu's subtle warnings. His green eyes blinked as he simply and objectively remarked, "No matter how many times I look, it still feels really terrifying." Speaking in a way none of the other members could understand, he pulled out his crude snack and placed it in front of Yakimaru. "Want to eat?" Yakimaru didn't respond at all to the outside world, until Edogawa Ranpo tore open the packaging and placed a cookie in Yakimaru's palm, as if sharing it with a little companion. "You didn't have breakfast, did you? These are really delicious cookies, crispy. The president bought them for me. Ranpo-sama is being very generous, sharing half with you." This scene stunned Kunikida Dalpo, as Ranpo was usually very protective of his food. Relying on his common sense, Kunikida quickly intervened, saying, "Wait a minute. Ranpo-san, typically those who are injured and seek treatment from Dr. Yosano need a physical examination. It's better to keep an empty stomach in the morning." Edogawa Ranpo turned his head and replied, "No need for that. This bandage-covered guy will tell us everything." Dazai Osamu, taking a moment, playfully remarked to Edogawa Ranpo, "Why is it that you call me bandage guy when he clearly wears more bandages?" Edogawa Ranpo, satisfied with the nickname, cheerfully said, "Idiot, of course, it's because he wraps himself in bandages to protect his easily injured muscle layers, while you wear them because..." For the first time, being called an idiot made Dazai Osamu's eyelid twitch, and he quickly interrupted. "Detective-san, please respect the client." "Humph." Edogawa Ranpo let out a huff, then ignored the suicidal man and focused all his attention on coaxing Yakimaru. Under the temptation of food, Yakimaru took the cookie in front of him and stared blankly at it. He pinched the cookie between his fingers, causing some crumbs to fall, before finally using his intuition and experience to understand what the food was for. Thanks to Edogawa Ranpo's guidance, Fukuzawa Yukichi deliberately chose not to appear, allowing Yakimaru to feel surrounded by harmless life flames and be more willing to accept their kindness. Just as Yakimaru was about to remove his mask to eat, Dazai Osamu leaned over during his conversation with the clerk, let out a playful, "Ah," and ate the rugged-looking cookie meant for Yakimaru. Edogawa Ranpo. As Dazai Osamu chewed, he casually commented, "This type of cookie is easy to choke on. It's not safe to eat." Edogawa Ranpo slammed the table and argued, "Not at all. You're lying. I've never choked on it even once. If you chew it properly, you can swallow it just fine." Dazai Osamu then grabbed Yakimaru's hand, which Ranpo had touched, and blew off the crumbs. Yakimaru probably prefers something he can just swallow. Edogawa Ranpo deflated at that remark. Dazai Osamu's statement was true, implying that Yakimaru had even lost the ability to savor good food. Wait a minute. Edogawa Ranpo suddenly remembered his own ability. Quickly, he put on the glasses the president had given him. "Let the great detective reveal all, my ability, super deduction." This sudden declaration of his ability's name startled Dazai Osamu, and the others were equally surprised, not understanding why Ranpo-san was being so proactive today. "So that's how it is, I understand now," Edogawa Ranpo calmly stated with half-closed eyes. Dazai Osamu found it difficult to laugh. This ability was too much of a cheat. Was Ranpo really going to use it to detect Yakimaru's past? Even Dazai himself hadn't been able to uncover that much information. The 165-centimeter-tall famed detective stood up, his hat shading his tousled hair. His green eyes reflected the similarly tall young man before him. Unable to resist, he bent down and ruffled Yakimaru's hair, saying, "You've done well, better than anyone. Ranpo-sama sees it clearly. Your strong will to survive. In the fragile realm of humanity, what surrounded them was a soul that refused to yield. Thus, even if trapped in hell, it would still crawl back to the human world to catch a glimpse of the heavens above. Afterward, Edogawa Ranpo turned to Haruno Kirako, who served as both the receptionist and the agency's secretary, and said, "No need to ask further. Just go inform Dr. Yosano directly." Ranpo-san, his eyes. Kunikita Dalpo suddenly noticed something. Yakimaru hadn't blinked the entire time. Fools. Idiots. Edogawa Ranpo was visibly displeased with their slow reactions. You still haven't realized he's wearing a full-face prosthetic, have you? Behind his mask, he has no facial features. His limbs are all prosthetics. What kind of horrifying information was this? And it was caused after birth, not something he was born without. Edogawa Ranpo turned to face Dazai Osamu, revealing the truth that overturned previous assumptions from their diagnostic tools. After he was born, many of his body parts were taken: his skin, ears, eyes, nose, tongue, sense of touch, and limbs. All of these were deliberately targeted, full of malice. The ultimate goal was to disassemble his body and kill him. Dazai Osamu, deep in thought, asked only one question: can he be treated? Edogawa Ranpo hesitated. As a detective, he based his conclusions on reality, not empty speculation. Under Yakimaru's gaze, which seemed to sense something, Ranpo looked back. There was no pity, no fear, only the detached observation one might have when looking through a glass display case at a tragic story written out in words. And these words, which formed the person before him, were so full of holes that only a single thread of consciousness clung tightly to the world. Pushing his glasses up his nose, his green eyes closed, reverting to his usual half-lidded expression. If his healthy body was born into this world, the body parts he lost after birth can be treated. Even though he called himself a genius, after confidently assuring the president to invite the necessary person, Ranpo couldn't help feeling a twinge of doubt. No, Ranpo-sama never doubts. There has to be a chance. The key was, the cause of Yakimaru's physical disabilities must lie within the bounds of common sense. With the president absent, Tayama Katai was lazily doing his own thing. As he drifted off to sleep, he was suddenly startled awake by the sound of the guest room door being opened. He sat up in shock, yelling, "Is there an enemy?" Kunikita Dalpo, exasperated, replied, "No, there isn't." His expression didn't look great, as he went off to inform Dr. Yosano. Meanwhile, Haruno Kirako covered her mouth, her composure shaken, and quickly left the office, saying, "I'll go report to the president." The armed detective agency was about to face the task of saving a person, someone with terrifyingly severe disabilities. Chapter 14 End. Chapter 15, Thou Shalt Not Die. Dororo. Where is this? There are so many white life flames here. Yakimaru had lived through an era of war and natural disasters. How could he have ever encountered so many souls that hadn't been numbed or corrupted? Most people didn't have enough to eat or wear. With just a little wealth, their inner demons could be unleashed, turning them into villains no less terrible than monsters. In Yakimaru's memories of wandering alone, the white life flames usually kept their distance from him, never approaching easily. The gentle and kind-hearted were often also the weak and cowardly. So, why were these people willing to stay around him, illuminating a small patch of darkness? Are they trying to help me? With a mind more attuned than most, Yakimaru grasped their goodwill, surpassing logical thought. Since arriving in this world, he had been separated from the darkness of the Dororo world by an invisible barrier. His limited knowledge and perception were all he had to rely on, and the only thing he could truly trust was holding on to Dororo. It wasn't that he didn't want to return home to see his adoptive father, but the momentum of the story reminded him that to defeat the demon god and reclaim his body parts, he had to follow the destiny set by the heavens. Just wait a little longer, and he would return. Once he retrieved the pieces of his fate, he would definitely go see his adoptive father and thank him. Yakimaru could feel Dororo's grip tighten in earnest, while he himself steadied his heart. In his mind, he sketched out the slender curve of the other's fingers, squeezing back, responding to that deep desire to save him. I have never resented the world. Please don't be sad either. I will do my best to save myself, clinging to any thread of hope. A flicker of surprise passed through Dazai-Osamu's eyes. Yakimaru, does he understand the meaning of why I brought him here? Right after settling his thoughts, Dazai-Osamu lifted the corners of his mouth, withdrew his hand, and knocked gently on Yakimaru's head. Stop overthinking. The doctor will be here soon. Dazai-Osamu's comforting gesture toward the masked boy didn't escape the eyes of others. Even if what lay behind the mask might be hideously disfigured, his refusal to compromise in the face of hardship and his ability to hold on to the light of humanity in the darkness shone through the seemingly ordinary exterior, stirring an indescribable emotional response in those around him. It was as if even the heavens themselves felt pity for him. Regret his death, give him the chance to survive, and offer him hope for healing. Every member of the armed detective agency has undergone trials, shares a common belief, and naturally feels deep sympathy for Yakimaru's circumstances, willing to save him first without discussing terms. Not bound by reasoning, not bound by relationships, not bound by shame. These are the rules of action for chivalry. Both members and interns show goodwill to the two entrusted individuals, and as Dr. Yosano immediately determines the prosthetic limb, she furrows her brows, stepping in high heels as she reaches a certain distance. They still didn't know what kind of scene Fukuzawa Yukichi wanted them to witness in the end. Yosano Akiko quickly stepped in front of Yakimaru, closely inspecting the renowned injuries. Then, she cast a glance at the somewhat deceptive-looking Dazai-Osamu and asked, "Are you his friend?" Dazai-Osamu's reply was vague, more or less. Friend? What is that? Has he and Yakimaru reached the definition of friends? Yosano Akiko rolled her eyes. Is there such a thing as more or less when it comes to being friends? You were able to bring him to find me, so I assume you must have gone through various inquiries. Information about me at the Armed Detective Agency isn't publicly available. Once a death angel of the military, the current medical practitioner softened her tone toward Yakimaru. How did you end up looking like this? Yakimaru glanced at Dororo on his left, then at the white flame in front of him. The newly appeared white flame had a soft feeling, burning beside the flame like threads. If the flame of Dororo was like a rough streak of pure white drawn in the dark, the stranger's flame was like fluffy white cotton. I'm remembering something from the previous life. Unable to answer anyone, Yakimaru faced the stranger with the cold demeanor of a puppet. In his self-imposed isolation. Cold and aloof every day, in the future, there might be a chance to go in the direction of a Gulong style. This young lady, he can't hear you, Dazai-Osamu smiled and answered in place of Yakimaru. His name is Yakimaru, about 14 or 15 years old. He is missing many important body parts and relies on prosthetics to maintain his ability to walk. The specific details are better judged by you yourself. Compared to you, we are all amateurs. Admitting his own inadequacy in front of a doctor was undoubtedly something that could restore a bit of goodwill from Yosano Akiko. Yosano Akiko used her gaze to inquire with Edogawa Ranpo. Edogawa Ranpo paused mid-bite as he crunched on his cookies and, while chewing a small bear-shaped cookie, said, "The president won't be showing up at the office. He's left all the decision-making to you." He proactively turned his chair around, facing away from the others. "This is fine for me." Dazai-Osamu. This scene looked oddly familiar. Wasn't this exactly something he had gone through himself? Sighing, Dazai-Osamu stepped back, positioning himself behind Yakimaru. To prevent Yakimaru from turning with him, he didn't release his grip on Yakimaru's left hand, pressing down on his shoulder. Lowering the danger. Okay, this way it would make the doctor's examination easier, without causing any unnecessary agitation. "Doctor, please." After following a series of procedures, Dazai-Osamu, for the first time, seriously spoke to Yosano Akiko upon their first meeting. Please, be as calm as Mori-san when you finish the examination. An examination here? Yosano Akiko wasn't too pleased, but Edogawa Ranpo said, yes, it was my suggestion. Let them see it. This is something our armed detective agency members will eventually have to face. The renowned detective glanced at Dazai-Osamu out of the corner of his eye, some words unspoken but understood. This is the price of treatment. Dazai-Osamu agreed, saying, don't worry, Yakimaru won't mind your judgments. Whether you like or dislike him, it means nothing to Yakimaru. The only ones who can accompany him are those he trusts. He lifted the corners of his mouth in a slight smile, even though he himself wasn't sure how long he would accompany Yakimaru. However, finding something meaningful in life was far better than continuing a numb, aimless search. Yakimaru, I want you to see this world that is neither black nor white clearly. For me. Go experience it. In the empty office of the Armed Detective Agency, Yosano Akiko carefully removed Yakimaru's facial prosthetics. Suddenly, without any warning, she was confronted with his face, lacking key body parts, the skin peeled away. Her hand trembled, failing to hold onto the mask beside her. Before it could fall to the ground, Dazai-Osamu swiftly grabbed it. Be careful, doctor. His voice rang out sharply in the dead silence of the office. Kunikita Dalpo was stunned, the color instantly draining from his face. Tayama Katai, who had been dozing off, immediately widened his eyes, clutching his blanket tightly and hiding his head under it, his whole body trembling. Is this Yaki-san? Haruno Kirako, returning from the president's office, screamed in fright and backed away, leaning against the wall in fear. Yosano Akiko stood frozen, her 5 fingers hesitantly hovering over Yakimaru's face, which had lost everything. Compared to Haruno Kirako's terror, she was clearly brought back to vivid memories of the battlefield. A fragment of dark memories surged in her mind, the exhausted and despairing soldiers, the blood-stained chaos of war, an endless conflict. Just like this face without skin, stripped of all beauty, exposing its harsh reality, it stirred a profound sense of sorrow within her. Why do humans always hurt each other like this? He can see you. Dazai-Osamu's soft tone floated up, as if he were narrating the most indifferent statement. Forgot to mention something, his spine is also prosthetic, so remember to remove it during the treatment. He simply avoided looking directly at Yakimaru's face, and also avoided seeing the reflection in Yosano Akiko's eyes. He lowered his gaze, quietly sensing Yakimaru's calmness as his mask was removed. Is this doctor a good person? Just like you believe in good people, in those who have never killed. Yosano Akiko couldn't believe it. Unless it's an ability, there's no way he can see me. Dazai-Osamu replied, Doctor, you wouldn't mind trying, would you? Yosano Akiko, with a fierce determination, reached out to touch this face. But just as she was about to do so, her hand was caught by Yakimaru. Slowly, Yakimaru released the stranger's hand. His eyes, visible through the 2 empty holes without a mask, were silent, devoid of the typical upward slant of youthful, handsome features. He was the unluckiest among the unfortunate, the ugliest among the ugly, destined to lose everything from the moment he was born. Yakimaru had cried. In that fleeting moment at birth, he had let out a single cry. In the birthing room, his mother, the maidservants, and the wet nurse all heard it. But after the thunder rumbled, he was robbed of 12 vital body parts by the demon god. Losing his skin and bones, with incomplete layers of muscle, blood flowed, and his limbless, bare body terrified everyone. That sharp, infant cry became Yakimaru's only plea for survival in this world. The statue of Kannon, placed beside the birthing room, faced Yakimaru. After the baby was born, an invisible force struck the head of the statue, barely managing to protect his life. From that moment on, he became like this. Yosano Akiko didn't know Yakimaru's past. She was mentally shaken, especially after hearing Dazai-Osamu's words, which pierced deep into her heart. Yakimaru's spiritual eyes can distinguish between good and evil, but others cannot easily approach him. To him, the young doctor is a good person. A simple statement, yet it made tears well up in the corners of Yosano Akiko's eyes. Am I really a good person? The one who forced soldiers to be unable to die, constantly restoring them, eventually leading them to break down and commit suicide on the battlefield, the death angel of the past, after all these years, was seen as a good person by a boy who had no eyes. She had never killed anyone, yet countless soldiers had fallen into despair and hatred because of her. She had not managed to save the people she wanted to save. Unexpectedly, Edogawa Ranpo continued, "That's right, you are a doctor who saves lives and heals wounds, the most important member of the armed detective agency. He believes you are a good person because he sees your inner self." Yosano Akiko was shaken to her core. Dazai-Osamu smiled faintly. Inner self? Edogawa Ranpo, refusing to turn around, sat on his chair with his legs crossed, gazing at the scenery like a mysterious figure on a poster. With a higher level of analytical ability than Dazai-Osamu, he confidently made his statement. None of us here have ever killed anyone, nor committed any crime out of selfish desires. The president, due to his past profession, cannot be seen as a good person in Yakimaru's eyes, but all members of the armed detective agency stand on the side of justice. Who we are reflects who the president is. With these final words, Edogawa Ranpo made an effort to clear Fukuzawa Yukichi's name, boosting the morale of the agency members. Yosano Akiko wiped away the excess of her vulnerable emotions and looked directly at Yakimaru. "Nice to meet you. I am Yosano Akiko, the medical practitioner of the Armed Detective Agency. I don't know if you can feel that I am speaking, but thank you for your approval. My ability is, Thou shalt not die, which allows me to restore those on the verge of death to a perfectly healthy state. This is an ability that, in the outside world, would be shunned by many. Rest assured." The girl who, at 17, had already experienced the horrors of war, began to work on Yakimaru's prosthetics. With Dazai-Osamu's help, they placed the limbless Yakimaru onto the seat. Dazai-Osamu used his body to shield Yakimaru's disfigured limbs, allowing only Yosano Akiko, as the doctor, to see clearly. "I will definitely restore you to a normal human state." The ability, "Thou shalt not die," is the embodiment of Yosano Akiko's inner plea, "Please, do not die." After making up her mind, Yosano Akiko touched Yakimaru's shoulders, and her hands emitted a white glow from her ability. The light enveloped Yakimaru, and suddenly, there was no need to first cut him into a severely injured state. Because this person has always been on the verge of death. Dazai-Osamu released his hold. Yakimaru, his inner vision overwhelmed by the blinding light bursting from the darkness, instinctively turned his head toward Dazai-Osamu. Under the power of the healing ability, his lost arms began to gradually regenerate. His left forearm truly grew bone and muscle, slowly transforming, forming a hand. His face was restoring skin, his eyes, nose, and lips reappeared. The once grotesque and terrifying muscles were now halfway covered, forming the face of a human boy, one even more striking than the mask he had worn before. A miracle like no other. From the depths of extreme ugliness, the inherent beauty of humanity was born. Yakimaru suddenly broke free from the darkness. His pupils, overwhelmed by the blinding white light, couldn't clearly see anything. Instinctively, he searched for Dororo behind him, filled with immense panic. No matter when or where, Dororo was always the direction of his gaze. Dazai-Osamu gave a dry, faint smile. Yakimaru. Yet deep inside, he was actually nervous. His face stiffened, trying to show his best side. What does a smile even look like? Would such a smile be something Yakimaru could accept? But Dazai-Osamu noticed that Yakimaru's regrowth had stopped. The skin on his face had only restored halfway, while the other half remained raw, stripped of its skin. His gray-brown pupils were still hollow, without any focus aimed at him, and tears continued to flow uncontrollably. "What's going on?" Dazai Osamu shouted in alarm and anger. Yosano Akiko's breath caught. Everything had gone smoothly, so there shouldn't have been any issue with her ability. "Yakimaru." Dazai Osamu wanted to reach out to him, but he hesitated, afraid that, no longer human, might take effect on Yakimaru's body. After the miracle on Yakimaru's body paused, in an instant, he began to regress. His skin disappeared, and the limbs that had grown began to lose muscle, followed by the loss of bone, reverting back to the state of severed arms and legs. Originally, Yosano Akiko had been preparing to use a scalpel to remove the prosthetic spine, but she stopped. Her face turned pale with shock. The ability that had been working on Yakimaru's body had lost its effect. From darkness to seeing light, and then from the blinding white light back into darkness, it all lasted just a few dozen seconds. Yakimaru couldn't experience a complete sensation, but the moment he shed tears, he felt something real. Was I just restored? Why is it still darkness, still the world seen through these eyes? Yakimaru's once stable mind began to unravel, shaken by the impact. Edogawa Ranpo jumped down from his chair, rushing over and looking at the terrifying sight. He first covered his eyes, overwhelmed by the shock, before speaking with difficulty. "It's a force akin to a curse." "That's impossible." Dazai Osamu's hand had already reached Yakimaru, not even pausing to look at his face, as he tried to eliminate the force stealing Yakimaru's body parts. "My ability can nullify all powers." But, Edogawa Ranpo looked up and said, "What if it's not an ability?" Dazai Osamu fell silent, his pupils darkening. The truth they didn't want to face had been exposed, cruel and without mercy. What turned Yakimaru into this after birth wasn't the work of an ability user, it was something unknown. It was as if the traces of a curse were imprinted on Yakimaru's body, filled with malice. "Your body cannot be whole." Yakimaru felt someone wiping his face. The mask hadn't been put back on. The person who always avoided looking directly at him was now standing before him, illuminated by the soft, harmless white flame of life. Such light wasn't blinding, it was gentle and harmless. Dororo. His pupils faded from his eye sockets, tears falling, proving that his eyes had once existed. "I still can't see you clearly." The skin on his limbs was shattered and smooth, but where it was lost, the muscle beneath was torn open, and blood soaked through the bandages. Yakimaru's entire body was drenched in hot human blood, trembling quietly. His broken and incomplete form was horrifying to the eye, while also revealing just how terrifying the limits of human endurance could be. Dazai Osamu held him, whispering into his hair, near the spot where his ears should have been. "Don't cry. It's just one time that didn't work out." Remembering Yakimaru's face, he saw clearly the boy's disfigured, blood-scented features. The white shirt on Dazai's upper body became stained with Yakimaru's blood, dirty and soiled. His face lacked the usual fake smile. He spoke calmly and gently to someone who could not hear him. "Look, I've blocked out all the darkness for you. If you can't see the world, then don't." In the world within his mind's eye, the boy's life flame had clearly shielded him from the darkness. The raging power of the demon god was suppressed, a deep red light spreading through Yakimaru's very soul, eroding his spirit. Yet, it could never taint the pure white flame of life. Humans, sometimes, are very fragile. Yet sometimes, just a little warmth is enough to survive. Yakimaru was no different. He had lost the world, but gained his own Dororo. Chapter 15 End.